On this prequel episode, we've got our Pride and Prejudice follow-up. We're learning about translating fiction and previewing Solaris. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit podcast, where we talk about movies that are based on books. Before we get to our Pride and Prejudice follow-up and hear what everybody had to say about our thoughts and what their feelings are on the 2005 Pride and Prejudice versus the book, we've got our patron shoutouts. We have 2 new patrons this week. At the Hugo Award-winning level, that's $5 a month and gets access to bonus content. We have Tracy Drews. Thank you, Tracy. And a new Academy Award winner at the $15 level, which gives you priority recommendation status. And that new patron is Max Winters. Welcome and thank you, Max. And as we always do, we're going to go through our Academy Award-winning patrons, and they are Max Winters, joining the ranks for the first time, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Eli Young, Scratch, Just Scratch, Shelby Says Black Lives and Trans Lives Matter, Keira Knightley is my favorite atheist, and Alina Doletkolova. I think I knew that about Keira Knightley.
I don't think I did.
I did. It's one of the, it's like her and Brad Pitt. Or like the famous ones. I don't know. But yeah, fun fact. All right, let's go ahead and find out what everybody had to say about Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
So we got a good bit of feedback for Pride and Prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of comments, so I'm going to go through some of those. On Facebook, we had 2 votes for the movie and 1 for the book. Tracy said, I have a love-hate relationship with Pride and Prejudice. I always loved the movie and could never get through the book for whatever reason. I've tried reading it so many times since high school, and I would just stop at the beginning and not finish. However, when I saw you all were doing this episode, I decided I was going to finish this book no matter what, and I actually enjoyed it. So thank you for ending my weirdly toxic relationship with this book. I'm still going to give it to the movie because I love how they portray the story, but the book has a newfound respect from me.
Cool. That's nice that somebody was able to get through the book.
Yeah, we love to hear stuff like that.
Love to hear it.
Yep. Matthew said, I had to read the book in college and the zombies barely make an appearance. I don't see how anyone can prefer it. Matthew's got the jokes.
Yes, there is a, which we haven't talked about, but there is a Pride and Prejudice and Zombies film.
Yes.
That is, I think.
But it is based on a book.
Oh, it's also
there
based
was
on
like
a
book version
first,
which I've never read. My understanding of it was that it's like literally Pride and Prejudice, but with like zombie pieces written in. I don't know if that's accurate. I've never read it, but it did get.
That's what it is. That's what it sounds like the movie is.
Yeah, it did get a film adaptation, which I have also not seen.
Nope, me neither.
Maybe that's a someday thing.
Yep.
Ian said, I'm a cishet white dude about to turn 40 that never bothered to try out Jane Austen before you guys picked it for an episode. I feel like a Midwestern upbringing placed things like Pride and Prejudice squarely in the This Is for Girls category. I got into it, though. The book is interesting from a cultural standpoint at the very least. The society, and to borrow a phrase from one of her other titles, sensibility of the whole thing felt very strange. The language alone, the phrasing and euphemisms of the early 1810s was something I struggled with, and I'm a voracious reader. The movie, on the other hand, made understanding the dialogue much easier, as Keira Knightley and British John Cusack had very good chemistry and repartee. As someone new to Austen, I have to go movie. The dialogue flows much easier than the reading, and the details changed felt more like streamlining than omission.
Interesting.
And I can relate to that. Like, the language is kind of tough to get through when you're reading something that's older.
There are other pieces of fiction that I've felt that way. I can't think of one off the cuff, but there's definitely other pieces of fiction that or especially period pieces where language is very different. We're sometimes seeing it because I think a fair example of that is Shakespeare.
Shakespeare's a very fair example.
Like an obvious example.
I think there's an extra layer to Shakespeare because it's meant to be performed and viewed rather than read. but I think that's definitely a fair example because the language is so far removed from what we're used to, and it's a lot easier to understand it when you're watching
when you
somebody.
Get the context clues
when you get the context and you get, how that character is actually portraying those words rather than just like reading them flatly on a page.
Yeah, because they're giving whatever the proper emotion is. If they're doing their job correctly, they're giving whatever the proper emotion is, so you can then figure out, okay, that's how that line is meant. You know, that's a joke as opposed to like a serious line or something like that.
Over on Twitter, we had 9 votes for the book, 4 for the movie, and 4 people who couldn't decide. I had to start including that option in the poll. And we had several comments. Nathan Bodnar at Nathan Bodnar. Actually, Nathan, tell me if it's Bodnar or Bodnar. Let me know, Nathan.
Let us know.
He said, I'm above all else a romance junkie. There have been many works of fiction that I completely lost the main thread of because I got caught up in a romantic side plot or even a ship that was completely non-canonical. So I love how this movie gave me the romance, and thus it's my choice. Also, Keira Knightley is not in the book.
This is true.
It's a fair assessment. That is accurate. And I think that is really nice about an adaptation like this is that it can kind of bring something a little bit different to the table than you're getting if, it was just like a word for word, beat for beat adaptation. Patty Cruz Stanfield at PattyCake84 said, totally the book. The movie is good, but without being a 6-hour-long miniseries, you can't get the nuanced details of the book. So kind of like the opposite perspective.
Yeah, literally the kind of, polar opposite.
Yeah, so the movie is not, as we discussed at length, a beat-for-beat adaptation, and some people are going to like that and some people aren't. Shelby Suderman at Shelby Suderman said, I preferred the book because I liked the details, and Elizabeth's gradual change of opinion of Darcy and Wickham felt more natural to me. But the scene where Darcy helps Bingley workshop his proposal to Jane was my favorite thing in the whole movie.
There you go. Similar to Patty there in terms of the details.
Maria Meshkova at Rogue_X109 said, the book is funny and the movie is beautiful. I just can't decide.
There you go. There's one of our 4 who couldn't decide. It's okay.
And Kelly Napier at Stand By for Live. Kelly, our Academy Award-winning patron who requested Pride and Prejudice, and specifically that we do the 2005 film, said, I love the movie. The cinematography, the music, Keira Knightley, all of it vibes. Also, satire can be hard to express outside of when it was written because the nuance of the era gets lost over time. I agree with their decision to focus on the love story for that reason. And I think that's a fair assessment, too. Satire is definitely something that is of its time, that is commenting on, often is commenting on current issues. And when we get far enough removed from that time period, it often can get lost, I think.
It is interesting because the director did mention, and we talked about this a little bit in the prequel, wanting to set one of the reasons that he chose to set the movie in the time period that he did was that he wanted it informed by the fact that the French Revolution had happened and that this would have caused potential sort of distrust and tension between the bourgeoisie and, or again, everybody in this movie, or everybody in Pride and Prejudice is kind of
they're all
part of the bourgeoisie.
They're all like ranked,
technically. I mean, but still, I think they were going for some class, but which didn't really come across in the movie. But what I was going to say is I think you could, I agree that it can get lost because it can be of whatever specific era it is, but I think you could also take whatever the satire is at that time and adapt it for a modern audience to a message that works for the modern audience. It's definitely more difficult and requires a lot more work than just pulling out the love story and telling that story.
I agree. That's definitely something you could do with a film.
It's also something that could piss people off more, though, too, is if you're taking and sort of interpreting the thematic message of the satire and like what it's commenting on.
Right.
And if people disagree with your interpretation of it and the way you adapt it for a modern audience, that could obviously, you could get some blowback for that. Whereas dropping it pretty much altogether is potentially still going to upset people, but not maybe in the same way.
Right. And I think too, maybe the strength of an adaptation over the original book in the case of something like satire is even if you aren't changing it or updating it, you can make it more obvious to the audience what you're talking about. Whereas if you're just reading a primary text from that era without already knowing the historical context, you might be a little bit lost.
Yeah.
And over on Instagram, we had 8 votes for the book, 5 for the movie. Matt W. Nelson said, had to go for the book, though I couldn't be too hard on the movie because of the young lady I saw it with when it was in theaters. We aren't together anymore, but it's still a memory I'm fond of.
Fair enough.
The Leap _77 said, I love reading, but dang, this historical era is tough sledding. I always appreciate the visual medium more when the written medium is somewhat dense and open to interpretation. Most of the time I prefer books, but 19th century writing is just not my cup of tea.
There you go. And it's a thing I think a lot of people feel like we mentioned earlier about something like Shakespeare.
Right.
Where it's so much easier to digest seeing it as opposed to reading it.
Absolutely. And our final comment from the Shy Chick, who said, I have to go with the movie. The cinematography with the score is just perfection, and it is one of my comfort films at this point. I will say, I loved the movie so much it inspired me to read not just this book, but many of Austen's works. And I think that's a great outcome, too.
Yeah.
When you have an adaptation that you love so much that it makes you go, I actually want to read that.
Yeah, that is cool. Awesome. Ultimately, the book took it. 18 votes to the movie's 11. So a slight edge for the book.
That's kind of about what I expected.
Yeah,
I expected the book to win, but without as much of an obvious landslide as some of our recent ones.
Because it is a beloved movie by a certain sect of people. Interesting. I would also be interested to see what those numbers would be with the miniseries. Not that we're going to do. I'm just saying that would be an interesting comparison.
Yeah, it would be an interesting comparison.
All right, let's go ahead and move on. We talked about how it can be tough sledding to digest something written in an era that you are not familiar with, but it can be equally tough to digest something written in a language you are not familiar with. So let's talk and learn a little bit about translating fiction.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
That was a beautiful transition.
Thank you. I was really proud of that one. Whew.
If I were still teaching composition, I would have you come talk about transitions to my classes. All right, so let's talk a little bit about translating fiction because this novel, Solaris, is a translation. Well, we're reading the translation because you don't read...
I don't read Polish.
You don't read Polish.
As it turns out. Nope. It's not a I read no languages other than English and a very poor amount of French. So
yeah, same.
Yep.
I could maybe pick through a little bit of French.
I could pick through a little bit of French if it was like a book I was familiar with. I might be able to feel my way through it, but other than that.
All right, so I think that the topic this week is pretty self-explanatory, but just in case anyone's not sure what I'm referring to, what we're talking about is the process of translating works of fiction into languages other than the language that they were originally written in. There's a bit of a Western tendency to think of translation as translating works either to or from the English language, but of course translation can mean taking a work from any language to any other language.
Although the word wouldn't be translation, it would be whatever word
it would
be, those cultures use.
It would be.
So when specifically speaking of translating, you are in fact only talking about from English to...
Sure, but the concept of translation can be any languages. Yes. So translating fiction is a unique challenge, especially if we compare it to translating nonfiction. Part of what that is because fiction tends to play with language more, and it won't always perfectly transition into another language. So fiction translators not only have to have a powerful grasp on both languages that they're working with, they also have to employ quite a bit of creative thought and problem solving. Now, obviously, all languages are different, even ones that are kind of similar. For example, Romance languages like French and Spanish. It's kind of similar, but still different.
But
And so anything with a linguistic quality to it in your writing is going to be inextricably tied to that language. Now we're talking about obvious elements like idioms or metaphors. If we were to literally translate the phrase, "it's raining cats and dogs," into another language, that might not necessarily mean anything to speakers of that language. But we're also talking about maybe not quite as obvious elements like the rhythm of a piece of writing, or things like alliteration. So it's a unique challenge to try and replicate a writer's unique style and voice while still accurately translating the material itself. And I think that's a big part of what makes fiction such a challenge, is that you're trying to copy, content as well as style, ideally.
Yeah.
And you can even run into the problem of a concept or a word that exists in one language but not in another. Get ready, because I'm about to butcher a German word. So there is a German word, oh boy, Backpfeifen-Gesicht, which literally translates in English to cheek whistle face. But the concept is a face in need of a slap. That's what that word means. So if you're translating into English, then you have no choice but to translate it as a face in need of a slap or something similar, because there isn't a singular equivalent word in the English language. Maybe there should be, but there's not. But it's English, so we'll probably just borrow the German one and butcher it a little bit.
Yeah, that's what we tend to do.
Yeah, that is what we tend to do.
Schadenfreude being an example of that.
Yes.
Where, it's a word that we don't have a direct translation for, so we just use the German word. I assume that's German. Sounds German.
Yes. I actually don't have this in my notes, but I thought of this later. Another thing that you can run into especially with fiction, is like made-up words and names.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can just go ahead and use whatever the writer made up. But sometimes you might run into other unique challenges. There's one example, and I think I'm remembering this anecdote correctly, when translating Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets,
the one that I remember,
into French.
I think in lots of the languages it was
in lots of the languages, yeah. But the one I'm specifically thinking of, when they translated into French, in order to get Tom Riddle's name to spell "I am Lord Voldemort," I'm pretty sure they had to make his middle name Elvis. If I'm remembering
there's
that
a bunch
right.
of fun,
yeah,
weird
there's a bunch of fun, weird
facts about
that
very specific thing of the moment where a D scrambles the letters and it says "I am Lord Voldemort," and in different languages, they had to do very creative things with his name and stuff to make it work.
To make that little moment work in that other language. Another unique challenge with translating fiction is that it invites the biases of the translator, often in ways that's much more of a concern than it would be with nonfiction, where you're just translating factual information. So I have another anecdote here. In 2017, Emily Wilson, who is a professor of classical studies at University of Pennsylvania, she became the first woman to publish an English translation of Homer's The Odyssey. And guess what? Her translation contained some notable differences than ones by men who'd already done it. Because there were a lot of people mad about
I remember this.
differences in her translation. But one example that I'll give that I think really illustrates this point. So at one point in the Odyssey, the character Penelope unlocks the storeroom where Odysseus keeps his weapons, which is one of the things that kind of kicks the end of the story into motion. And as she picks up the key to do that, Homer describes her hand as Pushus or Pacus. I'm not actually really sure.
I don't know.
I tried to look it up, but this word also exists in other languages, so I'm not 100% sure.
Don't know.
But this word means thick. And Wilson wrote in her translator's notes, the problem here is that in our culture, women are not supposed to have big, thick, or fat hands, right? It's not feminine. That's not beautiful and delicate. And other translators have solved that problem by either skipping over the adjective completely, just leaving it out, or by putting in something that is more traditionally feminine. For example, the 1996 translation by Robert Fagles mentions Penelope's steady hand, which is not really the same thing as a thick hand.
No.
Right? Wilson, however, translated it to her muscular, firm hand. And further noted in her notes that weaving does in fact make a person's hands more muscular. I wanted to ensure that my translation, like the original, underlines Penelope's physical competence, which marks her as a character who plays a crucial part in the action. Okay. Now, often older translations of a work can come to be viewed as inaccurate, sometimes even problematic, due to this issue. Sometimes also due to changes in how we perceive language, or especially in the case of older works, changes in the information that's available at the time. We could learn more.
Yep.
Right? So the reason that I wanted to talk about translation today is because Solaris is a translation, and it has its own translation issues, which you're going to talk a little bit about.
In the book facts for Solaris.
At precisely 1900 hours, I entered the cabin of the spacecraft and settled back for liftoff.
Ready, Kelvin?
Ready.
Good luck.
Donatas Banionis, Vladislav Dvorjetsky, Natalia Bondarchuk play the leading roles in Solaris.
So, Solaris is a 1961 novel written by Polish author Stanislaw Lem. Lem was born in Poland in 1921 and was a prolific writer over the course of his life, writing dozens and dozens of short stories, novels, nonfiction works, and fiction works that primarily occupied the science fiction genre. But he also wrote several crime novels, a psychological drama inspired by Kafka, 2 collections of reviews of and introductions to non-existent books, and a number of philosophical essays. He's regarded as one of the most highly acclaimed sci-fi authors, hailed by critics as equal to H.G. Wells and Olaf Stapledon, who I've actually never had heard of Olaf Stapledon. I looked him up, and none of his works stuck out to me, so I have heard of H.G. Wells. So Lem, this is interesting, and I just wanted to talk about this because I found it very, very fascinating. Lem only ever singled out one American science fiction author for praise, Philip K. Dick. Lem initially held a low opinion of Dick, as he did for most American sci-fi authors, but Dick ended up having... but another thing that's super interesting is that Dick... So he originally held a low opinion of Dick, Philip K. Dick, but ultimately, after reading some of his work, came around and was like, oh, no, he's actually a very talented science fiction writer, not like the rest of those Americans. But Dick actually had several disagreements with Lem over the course of his lifetime, and at one point wrote a letter to the FBI to claim that Stanislaw Lem was a false name used by a composite committee operating on the orders of the Communist Party to gain control over public opinion. And that he's not an actual author, but is in fact like a created.
So Philip K. Dick tried to rat him out, for lack of a better,
Even though he wasn't
he's
in
not
America,
really ratting him out,
yeah. It's still very strange. So there are several reasons thought for why that Philip K. Dick did this that have been presented over the years, including the fact, and this is like the main reason people think, is that Philip K. Dick felt monetarily shortchanged by the Polish publisher of the translation of Ubik. Which I have not read Ubik, and I think Aaron talked about Ubik a little bit at one point. It's a very interesting, strange Philip K. Dick story novel. But he felt shorted by the Polish publisher of the translation of Ubik, and Lem was the one who actually did the translation. And Dick seemed to think that Lem was somehow responsible for the publisher shorting him, like it was somehow fell on him. Whether or not I don't know, I couldn't find any details about whether it was or wasn't or anything.
I'm not sure how it would.
I don't know either. But for some reason, Philip K. Dick seemed to think that was the case. Also, it was suggested that Philip K. Dick was under the influence of strong medications, including opioids at the time, and may have experienced a slight disconnect from reality sometime before writing the letter.
That sounds about
And
right.
the last thing mentioned is that a defensive patriotism of Dick against Lem's attack on American science fiction, as I mentioned earlier, may have played some role in his letter to the FBI. I just thought it was a very interesting little story.
I love a good author feud.
Yeah, a good author feud. And I couldn't find anything about them ever, like, making up or anything, so... So, Lem said of Solaris that it has, quote, always been a juicy prey for critics, end quote, with interpretations ranging from that of Freudism, a critique of contact and colonialism, contact in this instance being, like, first contact between cultures, or specifically in this novel's interest between alien life and humans, ranging from Freudism to a critique of contact and colonialism to anti-communism, the latter stating that the ocean represents the Soviet Union. There's a red ocean on the planet. And the people on the space station represent the satellite countries of Central and Eastern Europe.
Interesting.
Also, they keep calling it a space station, which I also thought I remember reading, but it's not in space. It's like on the planet's surface. It's like from what I've gathered from, I've only a couple chapters in, but it seems like the station is almost like because they're like they're in the atmosphere. He descends through the atmosphere to get to the station, so it's not in space. It seems almost like the what's the big like helicarriers from like Avengers or whatever. Like that's kind of what it seems like. Like it's or somehow flying above the surface of this because the planet's all like an ocean. Except for a few small islands. And so they're like floated this station, but it's not a space station. It's not like the ISS like out in outer space. It's like close to the surface of the planet to some extent.
Interesting.
It's very interesting, but everything calls it a space station all the time because I guess that's the closest. I don't know.
More like an atmosphere station.
Yes. So as you mentioned about the translation, the English translation of this novel is a bit of a sticking point, and unfortunately, I've just found out that I'm reading the quote wrong version. So, the novel was translated into English in 1970 by Joanna Kilmartin and Steve Cox. Lem, who read English fluently, repeatedly voiced his disappointment in this adaptation, and that is the one that I have. Yeah, like I said, unfortunately, this is the version I'm reading as the 2011 English translation by Bill Johnston, which has been positively reviewed by Lem's wife and son. Lem was dead at this time, but they have read it and said this is more closely, this is a better translation. But it's not available in print due to legal issues. You can, however, read it on Amazon Kindle or as an audiobook. But it's not like you can't buy a copy of it. And so the physical copy of the book I have is the Kilmartin Cox translation, which is apparently suboptimal. But we're going to read it and see.
I'll take responsibility for that. I bought the book without looking into what the proper translation was.
But we're going to go with that one and see how it is. So, Solaris has been adapted quite a few times, including 4 audio plays, 4 audio books, 5 stage plays, 4 operas in German, Italian, Austrian, and Japanese, and 3 movies. A 1968 TV, made-for-TV... like in the USSR or whatever, Soviet film, the 1972 one, which is the one we're doing, and a 2002 film starring George Clooney. Of the 2002 film, Lem said, quote, "To my best knowledge, the book was not dedicated to erotic problems of people in outer space. As Solaris's author, I shall allow myself to repeat that I only wanted to create a vision of a human encounter with something that certainly exists in a mighty manner, perhaps, but cannot be reduced to human concepts, ideas, or images. This is why the book was entitled Solaris and not, quote, love in outer space." Not quote, sorry. And not love in outer space, end quote. So, he was not a fan of the 2002 film. He died a few years after it came out, I believe. So, yeah. But I couldn't find anything about what he thought of the 1972 one. I assume he enjoyed it more than... Oh, do you have...
I think I have
cool.
A couple, maybe.
And if you have any information, we're about to find out in our Solaris movie facts.
Let us take you with us to Solaris, planet of mystery, embodiment of man's latent conflict with the unknown. Man, face to face with his conscience and with his past. Directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, who gave us the classic film Andrei Rublev.
All right, so as you said, there are a couple different film versions, but the one that we are talking about is a 1972 Soviet science fiction art film, co-written and directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, I'm assuming is how you say his last name. This one is pretty highly reviewed. It has an 8.1 on IMDb, a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, and a 90% on Metacritic, which is like one of the highest Metacritic scores I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's pretty high.
Solaris won the Grand Prix Spécial du Jury and the Fipresi.
I don't know what the Fipresi prize is. I mean, this Grand Prix is like the award.
Yeah. These were both at the 1972 Cannes Film Festival.
Yeah, continue.
It was also nominated for Palme d'Or.
Yeah, that's the big award. It didn't win.
It was nominated for it, which is still good.
Yeah.
It generally received pretty positive reviews from critics, and it is often cited as one of the greatest science fiction films in the history of cinema, which just goes to show how little I know about cinema, because I had never heard of this movie.
I've seen a lot of good science fiction films, and I had not heard of it somehow.
This next note I have here, I copy-pasted this directly from Wikipedia because this might be one of the funniest things I've ever read on Wikipedia. Like, to me personally, this really tickled me. So this note this is verbatim. In 1968, the director Andrei Tarkovsky had several motives for cinematically adapting Stanislaw Lem's science fiction novel Solaris. First, he admired Lem's work. Second, he needed work and money.
There you go. I mean, those are two
really good reasons to make a movie.
I like this thing a lot and want to bring it to the film. Also, I'm broke.
I got no problem with that. But occasionally I find something on Wikipedia that I just love the way whoever wrote it phrased it.
Wrote that, yeah.
But another inspiration that he had was his desire to bring emotional depth to the science fiction genre, which Tarkovsky regarded as shallow due to its attention to technological invention. In a 1970 interview, he actually singled out Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, called it phony on many points, and a lifeless schema with only pretensions to truth.
That's wow.
So it's really like harsh words for a film that is oft considered quite great.
Yeah, a classic. And amongst the sci-fi films that many would consider more sort of philosophical in nature and less, it's not like Star Wars or something, which isn't, we've talked about, not exactly science fiction, but it is one of those that is definitely more sort of introspective and philosophical about like humanity and that sort of thing.
But not he's so like much of like a popcorn eating film.
No, but it is funny that even that he was like phony allusions to truth or pretensions to truth.
I hate the word phony. Reminds me of Catcher in the Rye. Tarkovsky and Lem did collaborate some, and they remained in communication about the adaptation. However, Tarkovsky co-wrote the first draft of the film, and the author was apparently furious over, quote, drastic alterations to his novel. Tarkovsky went back, he did another draft, which ended up being what they went ahead and put into production. Shooting for that began in March of 1971 with cinematographer Vadim Yusov, who also had photographed some of Tarkovsky's previous films, but they apparently fought so much while working on this film that they never worked together again. So we're marked by some drama here, this movie. A couple kind of production notes that I thought were interesting. The Solaris Ocean, which you mentioned, was created with acetone, aluminum powder, and dyes, which sounds delicious.
Yeah.
Mikhail Rodeman designed the space station to be lived in, beat up, decrepit, rather than like a shiny kind of futuristic
which
look.
I mean is interesting. only insofar as if you read the book, that's the only way you would design this.
Yeah.
Like literally, he gets there and it's just like it's a wreck. Like it's all like decrepit and falling apart. Again, I'm only like a couple chapters in, but because of what's been going on the station, is from my understanding, like there's leaks and piles of shit on the floor. Like it's just like a mess,
falling apart.
Yeah, because the
See,
people on the station have not been taking care of it because of the stuff that's been going on. Again, I'm not far enough in to know what's been going on with them, but stuff has been going on with them psychologically, so they've not been taking care of the space station or this
Interesting.
Atmos station or whatever we're calling it.
But the production also apparently did consult with an aerospace engineer, and that person lent them a 1960s era mainframe computer for set decoration. So that's probably a pretty big thing.
Yes.
I'm going to take this quote that I found at face value since I haven't read or seen this property. Solaris apparently doesn't much concern itself with real-world technology, doesn't refer to it much, but apparently did correctly predict 2 devices that ended up becoming real, which is home video recording and widescreen flat panel TVs.
Interesting.
So that was interesting.
I guess in the 60s they didn't. I feel like in the 60s home video recording was already a thing.
Like home,
not video, film
yeah.
recording, but yeah, I'm pretty sure my parents, my mom's family had a video camera in like the 50s.
Yeah, I think
like a little
right.
like, just one of those little 12 millimeter whatever.
Maybe they mean some other specific.
Maybe they specifically mean video, like video cassettes or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I guess we'll find out. So the actress, one of the actresses in this film, Natalia Bondarchuk, who plays the character of Hari.
I have not. I've only met 2 characters so far. I'm not very far in. So, and also that's one of the things that's. I'm sure these are the correct names. This translation, some of the names are changed to like Americanized names. So I may have to figure out who that is.
She revealed in a 2010 interview that she fell in love with Tarkovsky during filming, and then was suicidal after their relationship ended. That's how she described it.
This is such a Polish film.
So the author, back to Lem. This is what I found. Lem maintained that he, quote, never really liked Tarkovsky's version of his novel. Tarkovsky apparently wanted a film based on the novel, but artistically independent of it, while Lem opposed any divergence from what he wrote. Lem even went so far as to say that Tarkovsky made Crime and Punishment rather than Solaris, while Tarkovsky fired back that Lem did not fully appreciate cinema and expected the film to merely illustrate the novel rather than be its own original cinematic piece.
I mean, no, I'm biased, but I'm inclined to agree with Tarkovsky on this one. Again, having not finished reading the book yet or seen the movie, we shall see if we think it is a good adaptation or not. But I would agree that generally, if he, it sounds like potentially Lem had a bit of a pure, maybe not purist is the right word, but he was a bit of a stick in the mud about adaptations, at least of his work.
It is interesting because this is the debate that we run into all the time on this show. Is it better to adapt something beat for beat from the book or to make it its own thing?
Yeah.
So.
And we pretty routinely come down on the side of making it its own thing in a way that it at least captures, ideally you want to make it its own thing in a way that captures the sort of essence or spirit of the novel. But
both can be good.
Both can be good in their own way.
It just depends on, Anyway, we don't need to have that debate again right now. In the autobiographical documentary Voyage of Time, which came out in 1983, Tarkovsky claimed that he viewed Solaris as an artistic failure because it did not transcend genre as he believed another of his films, 1979's Stalker, did. And he felt that way due to the required technological dialogue and the limitations of special effects at the time. But everybody else liked it.
Yeah.
Roger Ebert gave Solaris 3 out of 4 stars and wrote, Solaris isn't a fast-moving action picture. It's a thoughtful, deep, sensitive movie that uses the freedom of science fiction to examine human nature. It starts slow, but once you get involved, it grows on you.
You could literally just substitute out the first word Solaris there with 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I feel like it would be the exact same review. Like you could write the exact same review for 2001. I'm not saying they're the same.
I've never
I'm just
looked
saying
up
it's funny
how Ebert reviewed 2001: A Space Odyssey, so I don't know how he would compare them.
No.
The film's influence on other films has also been noted. These include specifically Event Horizon and Inception.
Event Horizon, which I haven't seen all of, I can see. Because it's about people on a base encountering a thing and it psychologically affecting them. I don't really know where the Inception, unless there's some weird like.
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, I shall find out.
Movie,
I'm just interested to see. Look, from the premise of what I know.
Yeah,
I get the Event Horizon comparison. I'll be interested to see where the Inception in comparison.
Maybe
comes
we'll
in.
be watching it and we'll be like, "Hey,
yeah,
Inception."
Yep.
This film is part of the Criterion Collection. It is included in Roger Ebert's Great Movies list, and it's included on the 1001 Movies to See Before You Die collection by Steven Schneider. And it is over an hour longer than Soderbergh's 2002 remake.
I saw that. I looked up the runtime and I was like, oh, it's almost 3 hours long.
Yeah.
Which is wild because the book is only 200 pages. It's not like a tome. So it's like it was made it funny too when he's like, oh, he just wanted a beat by beat, recreation of the book. It's like, did you not do that? Because you had 200 pages in a book is 200 minutes? No, I mean, that's not true. But you could adapt a 200-page book in 3 hours pretty closely, I feel like. Pretty close. All right. Where can we watch Solaris? As always, check your local library, or if you still have a local video rental store, check with them. It's not available to stream anywhere. It's also, just as a warning, it is in Polish.
Yeah.
So you have to watch with subtitles.
Subtitle city for us.
Yeah, I didn't
week.
see. I didn't see a dub of it anywhere, which I prefer subtitles anyways,
right,
over a dub. But I didn't see a dub. If I know some people may prefer that. I couldn't find one, but I didn't do a ton of looking. But it is available to rent on Prime Video, YouTube, Vudu, and iTunes for $3.99. I'm sure other places, but there was no free streaming version of it anywhere. So
right, so it's not like on Netflix or anything.
No.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to rent it if you want to watch it, and just be warned, it is subtitled and 3 hours long. So, but apparently very, very good. So there you go. All right, that's gonna do it for this prequel episode. As always, you can do us a giant favor by heading over to our social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, liking, subscribing, or following, whatever you can do on each of those platforms, and responding so that we can give your feedback in the next prequel episode. Also, you can do us a favor by going to patreon.com/thisfilmislit and supporting us for $2, $5, or $15 a month, and get access to different benefits at each of those levels, including, mention it here, we'll mention it again on the main episode, we're about to record a review and discussion of for our patron bonus content, which you get access to at the $5 level, of the 2018 film Cold War, which we watched last night. And have some notes on. It's another Polish movie, also in Polish and some French, with subtitles. So, as you mentioned a second ago, back-to-back films for us in Polish, which is interesting. I don't know if I've ever watched 2 movies in a row in Polish with English subtitles.
Yeah, I
it's
think
probably
this is the first for me, yeah.
Yeah. So that'll be out sometime in the next week or so. And so if you head over to patreon.com, support us for $5 or more, you can hear that review and all of the backlog catalog of our bonus episodes. Until next week when we're talking about 1972's Solaris, guys, gals, non-binary, everybody else,
Keep reading books.
keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.